The verdict was never the real sentence. Everyone watched the trial. Everyone heard the word guilty read 5 times in a row. But almost nobody saw what came after, the part of this case that no headline could capture. 3 children, ages 13, 11, and 9, sitting somewhere outside a courtroom, trusting 3 therapists to walk to a podium and say words they had written themselves about their own mother. And not one of those children asked for her to be forgiven. Tonight we are going inside the part of the Kouri Richins case that ended when the gavel came down, and the part that is only just beginning. The psychological reality of 50 years with no parole, no children, and no way out. What does forever actually feel like? And what happens to a woman who spent her freedom denying everything? The moment that freedom disappears completely. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why her punishment did not begin with the verdict. It began the morning she realized this was her life now. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching this from and what time is it over there as you are watching. I read every single one. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear this case in full, and subscribe to Dark Pulse with the notification bell turned all the way on. Now let us get into it. On May the 13th, 2026, Judge Richard Mrazek walked into the 3rd District Court in Park City, Utah, and delivered the decision that removed any remaining question about what the rest of Kouri Richins' life would look like. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Not 25 years. Not a future date with a parole board. No countdown. No hope of walking out. Just life. The entire rest of it, inside. The sentencing came 2 months after a jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict on all 5 counts. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. More than 40 witnesses testified. The jury heard cell phone records, testimony from a housekeeper regarding the acquisition of controlled substances, and a toxicology report confirming fentanyl in Eric Richins' system at 5 times the concentration considered lethal. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for roughly 3 hours before returning their decision. 3 hours. Guilty on every count. Aggravated murder. Attempted aggravated murder. 2 counts of insurance fraud. Forgery. Judge Mrazek had 2 options before him. He could sentence Kouri Richins to 25 years to life, leaving open the possibility of parole at some point in the future. Or he could remove that possibility entirely. Before he made that decision, the court heard from the people who knew Eric Richins best. Here is the detail that makes this sentencing hearing different from almost any other you will ever hear about. The date itself. May the 13th was Eric Richins' birthday. He was born on May the 13th, 1982. Had he lived, he would have turned 44 years old that very morning. Instead, his father, his sisters, and his extended family sat in those courtroom rows to speak on his behalf, because Eric Richins had been gone since March the 4th, 2022, when he was found unresponsive in his home at 39 years old. The autopsy confirmed lethal levels of fentanyl in his system. Not close to lethal. 5 times the amount considered lethal. That is not an accidental overdose. That is not a miscalculation. That is a dose engineered to ensure death. And sitting at the defense table in a lime green jail uniform was Kouri Richins, the woman he had been married to, the mother of his 3 sons. She had been held at Summit County Jail since her arrest in May of 2023. For 3 years, the legal process kept moving. Motions, hearings, delays, and finally a trial that concluded on March the 16th, 2026, when 8 jurors returned after 3 hours and said guilty. Eric Richins was not just a name on a death certificate. He was a father of 3 boys, a youth soccer coach in his community, the kind of person who gave himself fully to everyone around him. His father, Gene Richins, stood up in that courtroom and told the judge about the man his son was. He talked about how Eric's soccer team still ends every huddle, to this day, by saying, 1, 2, 3, Eric. Years after his death, children who barely remember him still say his name before every game. Gene Richins asked the judge to make sure the woman who took his son never walked free again. Eric's sister, Kouri Richins Benson, addressed Judge Mrazek directly. She did not ask for vengeance. She asked for protection. She asked him to protect those boys, her nephews, from ever having to look over their shoulders, from wondering, for the rest of their lives, if the mother convicted of killing their father might one day come looking for them. And then the courtroom heard something that no summary, no news article, no coverage of this case has ever fully captured. 3 therapists walked to the podium. Not 3 boys. 3 mental health professionals. Eric and Kouri Richins had 3 sons together. At sentencing, those boys were 13, 11, and 9 years old. Each had written a victim impact statement. Each had made a deliberate choice about how his words would reach that courtroom, and not one of them chose to stand there himself. They trusted 3 therapists to carry their words exactly as written. Therapist Jessica Black told Judge Mrazek that her role was to deliver the boys' words precisely as they had written them. She said the boys wanted the court and the world to hear their side. The world. These were children who understood exactly what they were saying would be reported, recorded, and repeated. And they chose to say it anyway. The oldest son, Carter, was 13 at sentencing. He was 9 years old when his father died. He had spent 4 years, nearly half of his childhood, living inside the aftermath of that morning. Through the investigation, through his mother's arrest, through the trial, through the headlines, the court dates, the questions at school, the stares in public. When his words were read aloud, he did not describe missing the life he once had. He said he does not miss how his life used to be. And when it came to his mother, he was direct. He does not miss Kouri. Not mom. Not mother. Kouri. He used her first name. Those are not the words of a child coached by adults trying to influence a sentencing hearing. Those are the words of a child who had 4 years to think about exactly how he felt, and arrived at that conclusion entirely on his own. The middle son, Ashton, was 11 at sentencing. He was 7 when his father died. 2nd grade. The age when a child still believes the adults in his life will protect him. His statement left no room for interpretation. He told the court Kouri took away everything from him and his brothers. That she put herself first. That she put other people ahead of her own family. And then he said something that should stop anyone listening. He would not feel safe if she were ever released. Not uncertain. Not worried. Unsafe. An 11-year-old child, speaking through a therapist, telling a judge that his own mother being free in the world would make him feel unsafe. The youngest, Weston, was 9 years old at sentencing. He was 5 when Eric Richins died. The age when a child is just beginning to understand what it means to have a stable home, a routine, people he can count on. His statement carried a clarity that only comes from a child who has not yet learned to soften what he means. He said if she ever got out, he would be scared. He would be angry. He would not want to go near her. And then he said what he wanted. He wants her in jail forever. Forever. The room held that word. These statements were not shaped by lawyers. They were not filtered for tone. They were written by 3 children, trusting adults to carry what they could not say in person. And every single one of them said the same thing in his own words. Keep her there. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. After the impact statements were read, Kouri Richins was given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing. She took it. For approximately 30 minutes, she stood at that podium and spoke. Not to the judge, not to the jury, not to Eric's family sitting behind her. She spoke directly to her sons, even though they were not in the room. She told them she loves them, that she understood they were angry and that it was okay to feel that way. She asked them not to give up on her. She told them to be like their dad, to find peace and move forward with their lives. She also acknowledged publicly, for the first time, that she had been involved in an affair during her marriage to Eric. She admitted she had lied to him. She told her sons that when they are older, in their own relationships, they must never lie to the person they love. That honesty is the foundation of everything. But here is the detail that defined those 30 minutes. Through every message to her boys, through every piece of advice, she never once said she was responsible for Eric's death. Not once. She called the accusation against her an absolute lie. She said she would not be held responsible for something she did not do. And then, just before Judge Mrazek prepared to speak, Kouri Richins looked toward where her sons would have been sitting if they had chosen to be there, and said 3 words. "I am coming home." Judge Mrazek then delivered his sentence. He had listened to Gene Richins describe a permanent hole in a family and a community. He had heard Katie Richins Benson ask him to protect those boys from spending their lives afraid. He had heard Kouri's 30-minute address, her denials, her advice, her promise to her children. And he had heard, through 3 therapists, what those children actually wanted. His words from the bench were measured and final. A person convicted of doing what Kouri Richins was convicted of doing in the way it was done, for the reasons behind it, causing the kind of loss now permanently woven into the lives of 3 boys and an entire family. That person, he said, is simply too dangerous to ever be free. Life in prison without the possibility of parole on the aggravated murder conviction. The remaining counts carried additional consecutive sentences. No fines were imposed. Within hours, her legal team announced they would appeal and seek a new trial. That process will take years, and legal analysts consistently describe it as among the most difficult climbs in the appellate system. Overturning a conviction built on cell phone records, housekeeper testimony, and a toxicology report confirming fentanyl at 5 times the lethal concentration is not impossible. But it is exceptionally rare. And while that appeal works its way through the courts, Kouri Richins is not waiting in legal suspension. She is serving her sentence right now, every single morning, inside the Utah State Correctional Facility. To understand what forever actually feels like, you have to understand what her life looked like before those doors closed. She was a real estate agent operating out of the Park City area. She ran her own business. She managed her own schedule entirely on her own terms. She moved through her days with the kind of freedom most people never think about until it disappears. That life ended on the afternoon of May the 13th, 2026. Inside the Utah State Correctional Facility, the day begins at 5 in the morning. Meals occur at fixed times in designated areas. Every movement requires authorization and passes through controlled checkpoints. For someone who spent years running her own calendar, that shift carries a documented psychological weight. Corrections researchers have found that removing personal autonomy, even in small daily decisions, measurably affects how a person processes time and identity. But what makes this sentence heavier than the structure alone is what is missing from it entirely. Hope. In a typical life sentence with the possibility of parole, there is a date, a hearing, a board, a chance to work toward. Kouri Richins has none of that. The sentence is permanent, and that permanence is something she will feel every single morning for the rest of her life. After Eric Richins died with 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his system, Kouri Richins did something that still disturbs everyone who followed this case. She wrote a book. Not just any book. A children's book about grief, titled Are You With Me? It was designed to help young children cope with the loss of a parent. She promoted it publicly. She appeared on local news. She gave interviews talking about how she and her sons were learning to grieve together, processing the sudden, tragic loss of their husband and father. This was not years later, after reflection. This was before her arrest, while the investigation was actively underway, while prosecutors were building a case that would ultimately prove she had poisoned her husband deliberately, after attempting it once before and failing. She was selling a book about grieving the man she was accused of murdering. That level of disconnect tells you something critical about where she was psychologically when this case began. And it raises the question that will define the next 50 years of her life. Not whether she is guilty. A jury already decided that. The question is whether she is capable of understanding what she did, accepting it fully, and reaching genuine remorse before the weight of that denial crushes her mind entirely. Because the greatest threat Kouri Richins faces in prison has nothing to do with other inmates, with violence, or with institutional danger. The greatest threat is meaninglessness. And if she cannot find a way to create purpose inside a timeline with no end, she will not survive the next 50 years psychologically intact. Kouri Richins is 36 years old. If she lives to 86, she will spend the entire second half of her life in prison. More years behind bars than she spent in freedom. 50 years. 18,000 days. A number the human mind struggles to genuinely comprehend, because most people think in weeks and months, not decades. There are 2 distinct paths available to her now. The first is surrender, accepting the narrative she has told herself since this began, that this is unjust, that she is a victim of circumstances. That path means accumulating disciplinary infractions, isolating, deteriorating mentally, constructing endless stories about how the system failed her. It leads to a person sitting in a cell at 86, looking back on 50 years and realizing every single one was spent in anger, with nothing built. The second path requires something most people are not capable of. Accepting what she did fully, without excuse, looking directly at the fact that she killed her husband and destroyed her children's lives, and then asking a different question. Not how do I escape this, But who can I become while I am here? That path is harder in nearly every moment, but it creates something. A job inside the facility, education, mentoring other women coming into the system disoriented and afraid. Genuine relationships built over years rather than performed for a public that is no longer watching. It leads to purpose instead of mere existence inside a sentence with no end. But choosing that path requires something Kouri Richins has not yet demonstrated. Remorse. The book she wrote and promoted while actively under investigation, presenting herself publicly as a grieving widow while prosecutors built a murder case against her, tells you she was not immediately contrite. Either she was in deep psychological denial, or she was consciously managing a narrative. Both possibilities are disturbing, but prison changes people. The reality of life without parole can break through denial in ways nothing else can. When there is no performance left to maintain, no public image to protect, no jury left to convince, the mind begins to process things differently. The most important question of her sentence is not whether she will get out. She will not. It is not whether she will win her appeal. She almost certainly will not. The question is whether she is capable of looking at what she did, understanding it completely and accepting it. Because if she cannot, the next 50 years will destroy her from the inside. But here is the element that matters most of all. The real punishment is not the prison itself. It is not the concrete walls, the controlled movements, or the long hours of daily lockdown. The real punishment is her permanent estrangement from her children. She will likely never be forgiven by them. She may never see them again at all. The parent-child relationship she once had no longer exists in any functioning sense. She will not be present for their graduations. She will not be present for their weddings. She will never meet her own grandchildren. She will miss the entire second half of their lives. Those 3 boys, 13, 11, and 9 years old at sentencing, will grow up without a mother. They will build entire lives, fall in love, start families of their own, and she will know none of it. She will become a name they do not speak, a chapter they have closed. The only redemption path available to her, where her children are concerned, is becoming someone they might eventually respect, even if they never forgive her. Writing letters, even if they are never answered. Becoming proof that transformation is possible even after committing something unforgivable. If laws ever change, if Utah's system one day allows for commutation review after decades of documented genuine transformation, that possibility exists somewhere far down the line. Not as a likelihood, but as a door that stays closed to anyone who has not done the actual work to become a different person. Right now, Kouri Richins is 3 years into a 50-year sentence. The shock is wearing off. The adjustment is beginning. The question of which path she will choose remains completely unanswered. In 10 years, we will start to know. In 50 years, if she lives that long, the answer will already be written in everything she did or refused to do with that time. What will Kouri Richins have done with her time? Will she have grown? Or will she have spent 50 years buried in anger and regret with nothing to show for it? That is not a question for a judge. It was never a question for a jury. That is a question only Kouri Richins can answer. Drop a comment below right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is over there. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to understand what happens after the verdict. And subscribe to Dark Pulse with the notification bell turned all the way on. For Eric, for Carter, Ashton, and Weston, who said what they needed to say and asked only to be kept safe. This case is not over, and neither are we.